close stance goblet squat. So that heel elevated is going to give me a little bit more ankle range of motion, and that close stance is going to keep my knees more in front of me. So when I go into that squat position, it's going to drive my knees forward. It's going to increase the demand on my thigh musculature. So this is just a simple way for us to be able to get a little bit of an overload of our quads versus like our glutes and our hamstring. It's just a way for us to kind of play with physics and biomechanics to, again, bias the quads. So this is going to depend on multiple things and how close you can get your feet. So the first one being is when my feet are together, again, like I was saying, if I rotate my feet out and I bring my feet into a hip width position, and when I squat, that relatively shortens my femur length versus here if my torso is vertical. So if my torso is vertical, there's a bigger line from my hip to the front of my knee versus if my hips come forward and my legs out to the side, that's gonna shorten the length of that thigh. That's also known as like a moment arm. So if we're gonna go with a heel elevated position and my feet are gonna be together, and I'm holding that goblet position, it's gonna force my torso more vertical. And when I come down into that bottom position, it's gonna really load my quads. So if you have some range of motion deficits in your knees, if you have some lower leg bone, your tibia rotation is limited, those types of things, it's gonna limit your technique. More than likely, we've assessed those things and we wouldn't be putting you in this position if you weren't gonna be successful. Another way that you can scale it is if you're unsure is to start body weight, get a good heel lift, and then just do partial range of motion. As you have confidence and as things feel okay, then you can kind of add your depth. We would much rather see you be able to come all the way to depth with no load before you start adding any sort of external load. And as always, you want to be mindful of your breathing and bracing. We'll see a ton of times where people will do a goblet squat and they'll rest the dumbbell on their chest and then they lean back and they really end up arching their low back. And when you're arching your low back and you come to a squat position, it results in you getting into more hip flexion where you'll develop some irritability in the front of the hip. So you want to get in that good habit of being nice and tall, pushing your big toe into the ground, trying to not necessarily get like a posterior pelvic tilt or not tucking your hips under you, but staying in relatively neutral alignment. And if your big toe is pushed into the ground, the first thing you think of is my knees bend and my hips will follow, and that'll take me into that bottom position of the squat.